I'd just like to say thank you very much to Steve, who's presenting from New Zealand today, from Totara HQ. He's doing this in his evening to come and teach us all about accessibility. So I just want to say thank you very much, Steve, and you're free to start whenever you're ready, really.
Cool. Well, I've had my tea already, so now seems like a good time to start. Um, Hi, everyone. I'm Steve. I am my job title is Senior Front End Developer at Totara, where I started in January. But my day-to-day job is a bit of a mix of stuff. Lots of writing front end code, but also bits of design as it relates to accessibility, and bits of testing as it relates to accessibility. Um, so, if you remember one thing from today, um, what I'd like it to be is that the most important thing you can do for accessibility, for making accessibility better for your site, is to make your words clear, plain, and meaningful. Now, this kind of seems a bit obvious, maybe, or a bit simple in hindsight, but it's certainly not very easy to do, as with lots of things that can have a big effect. It seems straightforward enough, but putting it into practice and making it go really well is a bit more tricky. So what we'll do is have a look at a couple of things to make that happen. So we're going to talk about three things. The why of accessibility, like why bother making your site accessible. The what of accessibility, like what do we mean by something being accessible, and what do we mean by disability. Then we're going to have a look at a couple of ways of how we can make our sites more accessible. One big reason to make your site accessible is the extremely exciting world of compliance. That was a little bit of sarcasm in case you didn't catch it. The most popular way of doing this is an ACR using a VPAT. So welcome to acronym world. An ACR is an accessibility conformance report. In other words, what kind of level of accessibility are you, like good or bad or somewhere in the middle? And VPAT stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, if I remember correctly, which is the extremely standard way of doing it. It's the most widely recognized, and the goal of it is to make it easy to compare products and vendors. You know, if everyone's using a accessibility conformance report in basically a similar format, you can compare them and say, okay, this one's a bit more, this one's a bit less. Lovely. Most of the time, this format is WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, like the global kind of international standard, or Section 508 for US markets. Over the years, things have kind of pulled together a bit. So these days, the revised Section 508 for the US is basically the same as the global WCAG, which is quite nice. It's all kind of coming together, and the world is kind of settling on one standard. So that's very happy making. Another reason, rather, to make your site accessible is that you'll end up having more customers and happier customers. I mean, what we're doing with Totara is providing digital learning to people, and we want to make sure that anyone who wants to access this learning can access it. I also do it because I think it's the right thing to do, and I'm a bit of a hippie, so that scares with me. It makes me smile when I go into work and I work on this kind of stuff. Having more customers and happier customers also means kind of more money, which, you know, that's also quite nice, I guess. Money is nice. I like to buy things occasionally. I think it's also worth talking a little bit about what do we mean by accessibility, because there's a couple of different ways of looking at it or coming at it. Accessibility, the way I like to kind of think about it, is it's catering to people with disabilities. That kind of makes sense, right? But then if you start digging a bit more, you're like, okay, well, what exactly do we mean by disability? You know, how do we want to think about this to do our best work and present our best product to as many of our customers as possible? The classic definition is kind of medical or physical. A disability is just an impairment that somebody might have that makes things more difficult to do. So if I have a hearing impairment, it's more difficult for me to hear stuff. If I have some kind of mobility impairment, maybe stairs are more difficult for me than a ramp or something like this. So that's kind of the classic definition, and the one that has been used for quite a long time. more recently, people have been using a kind of updated social definition of disability, where we look at disability as a mismatch in the interaction between a person and the environment that they're in. I first came across this definition in a book called A Web for Everyone, which is pictured on the right here, which is a very good book about kind of design and UX and a little bit of kind of codey stuff. And in that book, they use this equation. I did maths at university, so I love equations. They use this equation as a way of framing this. They say a disability occurs when somebody's ability comes into conflict with a barrier. And the key kind of slightly awkward thing about this is that the barrier is always created by the product. It's not created by the person. When we do our content a bit funny, or when we build our sites a bit funny, we put something in the way of someone achieving their goals, which they could have done if we hadn't put something in the way. So let's break this down a bit and have a look at what do I mean about this. Look at a few examples just to kind of clear it up, hopefully. So in this case, we could say, let's say we have someone has the ability to see some colors, but not all colors. So this would be a color vision deficiency, which we commonly call color blindness. So a barrier that we might unintentionally create for them is to use a bunch of text with low contrast. So by doing this, we're creating a disability for this person or with this person. So they can see lots of colors, but just not all the colors. We don't put enough contrast into our designs, and this ends up creating a disability, this conflict between this ability that this person has and a barrier that we have unintentionally, hopefully, created for them. So let's have a look at another example. So let's say somebody who's got 20/20 vision, they can see all the colors in the rainbow. Yay, that's great. But they're outside and it's a really sunny day, and they've got a brand new phone with a super shiny screen. And we've got a very designery kind of look, which means we've got this light gray text on a slightly lighter gray background. So again, this kind of color contrast thing. And now they're unable to see it. So we've created this kind of contextual disability. Like if they were inside, maybe they'd be able to see it okay because the contrast is a bit higher. Or if we had done kind of like very dark gray text on a very light white background, again, higher contrast, and so they're still able to see it. We haven't created any kind of mismatch. We haven't created any barrier in their way. So maybe you're thinking I'm going off the rails a bit and why this is a bit strange, but I think this framing is very important, and one of the reasons is because we can see that when we make small changes to the stuff that we're working on, we can actually help a lot more people than we think. So looking at this color contrast example, if we do some tests and we check the color contrast ratios and we set it to be a little bit higher contrast and a little bit easier to read, not only will it be easier to read for the person outside on their phone on the sunny day, but it might take it from can't read to can read for somebody who's colorblind, for example. So we're pushing things into a more accessible direction and trying to help as many people as we can. I mentioned it earlier, but the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are this big, huge, very dry documentation, but very exciting to people like me, set of standards. They are at version 2.1 at the moment, so they've gone through a couple of revisions over the years, and they divide, it's like a checklist of sorts of how to make your web content accessible, hence the name, and they come under these four principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. The keen-eyed among you will have noticed that that's another acronym scrolling down the left there, POUR, POUR. Each of these principles, they further divide into things called success criteria, which are these short little sentences that give you a testable thing to check on your website. They'll have a statement like all images have, or all non-text things like images have a text equivalent. Cool, this is a little success criteria. This is a testable statement that I can pick up, check against my website and say yes or no. And to make things kind of slightly more complicated but also more useful, they divide these success criteria into levels: A, AA, and AAA. The single A level means, oh cool, you have a baseline level of accessibility. Double A means you've got a good level of accessibility, and triple A means, wow, you're really kind of like pulling out all the stops. You're actually probably catering to specialist markets here, and you're doing an amazing job. But not every website can hit AAA, and in fact, the W3C, the organization that publishes the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, said that they don't expect people to hit AAA. In fact, it's impossible for some sites to hit AAA. So the recommendation is to hit level AA, excuse me, for these standards. And in fact, that is what is being adopted by the US for their revised Section 508, and is what is being adopted by the EU for their standards, which is 301549, if you like numbers. So this kind of WCAG 2.1 level AA is a very, very widely adopted, very standard, if you like. So let's have a look at a couple of the hows. Like, what are some of these success criteria? What are some of these things that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines recommend that we check our websites for? A big one is all non-text information has a text equivalent. So for images, for example, it's alternative text. So this is the one that anyone who's worked on a bit of accessibility will probably be familiar with. This is when somebody using assistive technology, like a screen reader, comes to a web page. They're often not seeing the web page, they're hearing the web page. So they can't see the image. And the alt text, the alternative text, says, oh, hey, if you can't see this image, here's the same information, but in text. For videos, the text equivalent means things like a transcript or captions. I see there was a question in the chat from Cat Sim. Is it compatible with the accessibility tool ReciteMe? I don't know. So I'll have to find out and get back to you. Is that one of the kind of toolbar add-ons? I imagine yes. In which case, great, thank you. So most of those, from my understanding from other ones I've played with, is that they work best with things that are done following the kind of HTML standards and standard form controls and this kind of thing. So it should broadly be yes, but like with all of these accessibility toolbar add-ons, a lot of them run with kind of heavy JavaScript, so there's probably going to be some kind of bumping up against each other there. But I'll have to dig into it a bit to be a bit more sure. I realize that's not a very definitive answer. Sorry, Kat. But I'll have a dig around later on, and I'll let you know a bit more detail. Okay, so to jump back to the slides. So carrying on from the kind of non-text information should have text equivalent. So things like charts are also important, right? So that actually sits for me in my head somewhere between just like a regular photo or a video, right? It's just an image, but it's a big complicated image. So your text equivalent for that will probably be like a long description, or depending on the chart, maybe just a table. If you mark up tables with the HTML properly, they're actually very accessible. They're not super lovely to try and work through, but they are very well supported by assistive technology. Okay, I think I'm getting carried away on this slide, so let's jump on to the next one. Link text describes where you go. So a nice golden rule that I have for this is when you click on something, the words of the text of the link should be fairly similar to the text on the next page. So the idea of a link is it tells you where you go. So that's why text like click here or read more aren't ideal for link text, because they don't kind of make sense on their own, and it doesn't tell you much about where you're going to end up once you've clicked the link. Other short stuff like in navigation, it's a great example of where link text does describe where you go, because it might say, dashboard or my learning. When you click on it, you land on the next page, and at the top of that next page it says dashboard. You're like, oh cool, I've gone to the right place. One reason why things like the same text in lots of links on a page, like click here or read more, aren't great is because people using assistive technology tend to read through a list of all the links on the page. So all the links get grouped and they kind of can jump down that. Or they might be using a keyboard and tabbing through the different links. So if you're tabbing through links and all you hear is read more, read more, read more, it's not super helpful, let's say. Similarly for buttons, the best thing you can do for buttons is to have text that describes the action that's going to happen. So whereas links tell you where you're going to go, buttons tell you what's going to happen when you click this button. So the default button text is often like submit, which sometimes is appropriate, but more often you want a slightly different action word, like sign in or publish or upload, or show or hide or something like this. So buttons are for doing stuff. So the text in a button, you should be able to answer the question, what stuff is going to be done when I click this button? Bonk. Okay, one which I feel like I've talked a lot about, so I won't spend too long on this one here, is good color contrast. So what do I mean by good? Well, there are specific color contrast ratios that the level AA standards ask you for. 4.5 to 1 for text and 3 to 1 for graphics and UI components. If you Google color contrast or contrast ratio, you'll get a slew of results with lots of places that you can basically copy paste your color codes into to say, okay, I've got this red on this white background, how's that doing? I've got this green on that red background, why did I make that choice? That seems like my eyes are burning. But you can check and see if the color contrast is good enough. And there's lots of other tools that are fun around for testing this, like making a page monochrome, so you can get a general kind of eyeball on, does it look kind of contrasty enough or not? But these numbers are the important ones for kind of compliance purposes, like is it hitting the spot or not? Of course, you can go more contrasty, but you don't want everything to be like just black and white, so there's a lot of kind of wiggle room in the middle. One of my favorite ones, which is tricky to get right if you have ever worked with developers, and I can say that because I am a developer, is to use headings liberally and well. So ideally, what you want to have is a single H1 on every page, like a heading 1. This is the main thing on this page. This is what this page is about. And then a scattering of other heading levels. So HTML heading levels go from 1 down to 6. If you've gone all the way down to 6 heading levels, it's probably time to rethink some of your page choices and think, should I maybe be splitting this into several smaller pages instead? But it's very common to see levels 1, 2, 3, and even 4. And ideally, what you want to do is to nest them correctly as well. So a common thing that you'll see cheeky developers doing is to use a heading because it has the right size. So the design is showing a kind of second level heading in some kind of quite small size text, but rather than just use a heading level 2, which is kind of semantically and logically correct, and then changing what it looks like, a cheeky developer will just throw in a smaller heading just so it looks correct and not worry so much about the, what's behind the scenes. And there are a couple of tools for this as well, for either, like you can see on this image, just like highlighting all of the headings on the page so you can kind of do a quick scan, or of kind of click a button and generate you like a little list of all the headings on the page. So there's lots of different ways of doing these things. So I've kind of rushed through lots of things, and maybe you're thinking that like, oh, holy crap, this seems like a lot of stuff to do all in one go. But I keep coming back to this quote that I found from Leonie Watson. Now, she is an accessibility engineer. She's a member of several W3C and accessibility kind of advisory boards, and she's co-chair of this and co-chair of that. She's all over the place, and she's amazing. And she speaks at conferences all over the world, maybe not in person at the moment. I'm not going to use the C word that ends in Ovid. And she happens to be blind. So I feel like she kind of really knows what she's talking about when she talks about accessibility stuff. And she says, it doesn't have to be perfect, just a little bit better than yesterday. And that is, I find that extremely reassuring, um, because it feels like there's a never-ending list of things that I want to improve or things that I could improve. But Leonie says it's okay if you just do one little thing today and then one more little thing tomorrow. And I find that very happy making as a way of approaching what could be quite a big task otherwise. So that's kind of it. We looked at the why of doing accessibility, which was a bit about kind of compliance and hippies, being me. Then we had a quick look at the what of accessibility. In particular, I would like you to remember that slightly different framing on disability, that social definition, where a disability is caused by the conflict between someone's ability and a barrier that the product or the content is creating. And then I ran through a couple of things for you for a handful of ways to start thinking about how to make your site more accessible, thinking about the text, thinking about text equivalents for non-text things. And just to kind of bring it back to the top again, if you remember one thing, it's that the best thing you can do to make your site more accessible is to make the words clear, plain, and meaningful. And maybe you're thinking, hey, that sounds a lot like good usability or just like a good content rules. And I agree. Good accessibility has lots in common with good usability. And that is it.
Thanks, Steve. That was great. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask, please feel free just to add them in the chat now. I noticed on the Hemingway aspect that you're using, Steve, on the first slide. I don't know if you touched on what that was exactly.
I did not. Thank you, Matt. Hemingway is this thing I discovered when I was looking up ways of writing better words. So there's lots of different things you can look at, right? Like reading level or something like that. But this Hemingway one is a bit like Grammarly. Some of you may know this as well, like that kind of browser plugin kind of jobby. So this does a quick scan for you. Hemingway does a quick scan for you of sort of a bunch of heuristics around reading level. You know, like are you using active voice or passive voice? Are you have you got lots of long sentences? Are you throwing lots of adverbs in there? All that kind of thing. So yeah, I love it. It's great. I think there's also a desktop app and stuff, but I've been using it all the time just by kind of copy pasting stuff from wherever I'm working on it and then tweaking it a bit and then kind of copy pasting it back.
Thanks, Steve. I'm just throwing in a link to some of the accessibility guidelines. You can correct me if I'm wrong with that one. Yeah, so for the Hemingway, basically, if you get a level 5, that's good. What does it range from? Does one meaning bad? Would that be because it has too much sort of difficult grammatical sentences, or what would be the criteria for making it very good or very bad?
Yeah, I tend for the Hemingway, I tend not to worry about the numbers so much, but I particularly look at the long or short kind of sentences thing and those individual little bits that they've got. In fact, let me just jump back to that slide. There we go. So the grade is a good kind of high level one, but I like to look at those little colored boxes down the side about the adverbs, passive voice, using simpler words rather than more complicated words, and the hard to read or very hard to read is mostly about sentence length, but also about your word choice. So I kind of like, oh, there's a red one there. Is that one that I should change? And sometimes no. I mean, sometimes you just have a long sentence and it's kind of okay. So like lots of these accessibility tools, they'll have lots of suggestions for you, but they're not. Sometimes there'll be false positives and it won't quite be right. You're like, actually, you're right. It's not the easiest sentence, but this one is actually okay. Like you want to be worried if all of the content you just pasted in is like highlighted in these kind of blood red colors. You're like, oh, okay, that's a bit tricky. I should probably revisit that. But if you've got one or two tricky sentences or one or two yellow sentences, it's like, you know what, that's kind of okay.
Yeah, so lots of people are saying, yeah, if you just use plain English, that'll be helpful. It is tricky though, isn't it? Because sort of as a person who writes courses as well, one of the things we're trying to do is make it engaging and interesting. And that's the sort of,
Mm.
and that can be a sort of trade-off, can't it? You're trying to write something that's interesting for the reader, but also is accessible and clear and plain. And those two things probably should go together, but sometimes they may feel like they're not if you're overcomplicating your sentences, trying to make
Mm.
them interesting to read. So it's quite
Uh,
a thing to think about as well.
See, Angela is asking for the name of the book, so let me just find that slide so you can see it as well. Boop. Let's have a look. It is back here a bit somewhere, but it's called A Web for Everyone, and it's Rosenfeld Media is the place we can get it. You can buy PDFs, I think, and EPUBs and Mobies. A Web for Everyone, designing accessible user experiences. Um, I read it quite. I think I read it quite early on as I was getting interested in accessibility, and it kind of really uh, blew my mind. It kind of took me on a different route of thinking about this. Um, One thing to look out for. I'm having trouble bouncing around and changing tabs and stuff. But for the web standards, see if you can find the thing that says quick ref or quick reference, because that one I find acts as a bit of a cheeky checklist. And it's got a little sidebar that lets you filter for stuff. So you can choose to only show level A and AA, or choose to only show the new rules, or only show stuff that's related to HTML, or this kind of thing. It's got lots of little filters. And you can bookmark the page with your filters on, which is basically what I've done. So you can come back and see like, cool, I just want to have a look at these again. Or today, I just want to look at the AA rules because I know we're kind of doing it okay on the A level, or that kind of thing.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I've got a question from, so I think it's Roger. I think so. You've got that one. Nikki's asking, we're having some issues with reading order on the page. I'm not sure if you know how that can be amended at all.
Nikki, could you tell us a bit more, please? Do you mean like a screen reader reading the page reads it out in a different order to the visual order on the page, or something else? Cool. Okay. Well, it feels a bit like a doctor trying to diagnose over the phone, uh, but um, and tab navigation. Um, so chances are, hmm, it could be a number of things. I mean, with CSS, you can change the order of stuff on the screen very easily, right? You can make stuff float left or right, or put it first or last. Especially with the newer Flexbox kind of stuff, you can really kind of do what you like with the visual presentation of the page. Um, the most important thing is that the HTML order is logical, and that the read out order is logical. If it doesn't exactly match what's on the screen in terms of kind of logical scanning, that's not ideal. But if the screen reader is still reading out content in an order that makes sense, then that's good. That's more important for me. But maybe you can post more details in like a forum, and we could pick it up there, so we could dig into it a little bit more.
Yeah, Nikki, that's good. If you could put that into the community forum, and then everyone else can help sort of talk around this subject as well, because obviously accessibility is a really big issue, and maybe the more people we can get involved in the community talking about this, the more we can help each other and find solutions as well.
I
I
will
don't
have
know,
lots of ideas and lots of links.
that's great. I don't know if anyone has any other questions that we've not answered yet. So just to confirm, this webinar is recording and we'll put it into the webinars on demand page, which you can access from the community. Got one more question. No. So thanks, Steve. I think we're coming towards the end. If you have any other questions, yeah, feel free to post them in the community, and we can start a bit of a discussion around accessibility. And I'll add this link to this recording into that forum post as well. So thanks very much for your time today, Steve, and thank you for everyone for coming either early or late in your evenings as well.
Cool, you're welcome. I seen we just got one last question come in from Linda. Do we have a minute to try and answer, or should we
Yeah,
take it to the floor?
we can answer Linda's question if we can.
Cool. Okay, well, Linda says our most common issues are staff who have dyslexia and staff for who English is not their first language. How can we best support them? Um, I think that is the Hemingway angle. For the English not their first language, that plain language and simple language is one of the keys. And using Hemingway or a tool like it will help a lot because it flags up all of the weird words or the unusual words or words where you could use a simpler word instead of a more complicated word. Of course, now I'm struggling to think of
So,
an
for
example.
also for English as not a first language, you can also have a look at the European Commission. They have different levels of language ability. So you start with A1 and it goes up to C, which is like a native speaker. And there it'll give you examples of sentences as well. I can try and post a link to that in the forums after this as well. And it'll show you, for example, if you're using the present perfect or which types of grammar are difficult. So for example, if you say something like, it has been attacked rather than was attacked, things like that are very difficult if you're not a native speaker. So there's lots of different uses of grammar that which you can amend quite easily. And there's lots of examples of that available on the internet, which I'll post to sort of give you a guideline. But again, it comes back to that challenge of trying to make your writing engaging, but also clear and accessible. So it's a bit of a challenge.
Mm, cool.
I think that's all of the questions from today. Okay, thanks so much, Steve, and thank you for everyone for coming. It's a nice group to have today.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks a lot. We'll finish there for today.
Cool.